This is what we're looking at today. It's an exercise from the Navy. The U.S. Naval War College took place October 31st, 2019, just a couple months before COVID, which is relevant. I'm sitting on my bathroom floor in the basement because usually when I do these, I am in the room beneath our bedroom. Stephanie is sleeping right now, and I have to talk loud because my microphone is garbage. I should probably order an actual camera so that I don't have to deal with this crappy quality. But, well, more like so you don't have to deal with the crappy quality. But anyway, we're going to try to make it work. So, one thing that you probably don't want to just jump right into this. This is really more relevant in the context of SPARS, Crimson Contagion, Event 201. What else? There's so many more. There's so many I forgot. But Lockstep was another one. So there's all of these drills that came out. SPARS was actually a long time ago, relatively, because a lot of these, they started running these drills about 2 months, 4 months maybe, before COVID emerged. So it's interesting that they started to run all these drills for how to manage a global pandemic. And then we had a global pandemic. Strange. But I do also want to note, because I don't think I mentioned this when I went over the SPARS document, that in the SPARS exercise, the vaccination came out 9 months after the virus emerged. In reality, with COVID, the vaccination came out 9 months after the virus emerged. So the timelines are similar. And this I did mention. So if that's the case, and when you look at that SPARS document, there are so many close parallels to reality, which is interesting because that was done about 3 years before COVID rolled around. But because the parallels are so close, even down to the timelines being synonymous, we have to look at the more concerning part of that SPARS report, which is that the vaccine started to injure people and kill people, and the exercise is really about how to manage the information when that happens. How do we convince people to still take the vaccination after we see that it's killing people? And now we have the first guy that took it, whose name is William Shakespeare, or he was one of the first. I think he was the first. He just died. So in that exercise, in that timeline, we had people dying from the SPARS vaccination, which they called Colosivir, or they had another one started with a C. And that occurred, I think, roughly a year following the vaccination. So what's going to happen in the next few months here is the question, because that timeline, that would put us at around the turn of the year. So, December 2021, we start seeing people drop like flies. We're already seeing people die. I mean, they'll suppress it and they'll say there's no connection because you can't prove causation. And it's the perfect thing to do if you really did want to decrease the population, as we've demonstrated, because there's so much plausible deniability. You can just say, oh, that was something else. So that's fun. Urban Outbreak 2019, the pre-analytic quick look. That's what the document looks like. So again, this was October 31st, Halloween of 2019. Now, the public became familiar with COVID-19, I think around March 2020. There's maybe some people that were more informed that had an awareness prior to that, but that's when the public became aware of it. But the people, like the World Economic Forum, the people at in the higher echelons were aware of this thing in December of 2019. So this just preceded the COVID outbreak, similar to the Crimson Contagion exercise. I believe that one was just before. I'd have to check the dates. I should probably write this stuff down instead of relying on my memory. But Event 201, that did take place right right before COVID broke out. So I'm just going to read through this. So this is the game overview. They actually provide a little more explanation in this one for how these simulations take place. From 17 to 18, December 2019, I don't know, they just don't say September 17th and 18th, 2019, the Uniformed Services University of the Health Sciences National Center for Disaster Medicine and Public Health and the United States Naval War College conducted a game at Johns Hopkins University's Applied Physics Lab in Laurel, Maryland. This was entitled Urban Outbreak 2019. This 2-day, 3-move analytic game was internally developed by the NWC's Humanitarian Response Program and emerged as an output from their 2018 Civilian Military Humanitarian Response Workshop. This event was executed in partnership with faculty from US, lot of letters. The game focused on the challenges and opportunities for organizations responding to a rapidly spreading infectious disease in a notional, dense coastal urban environment of 21 million people. Over 50 highly experienced players participated in this game, including real-world experts from international militaries, government agencies, public health, and medical responders, humanitarian, non-governmental, blah, blah, blah. A lot of people. Very in-depth exercise. Urban Outbreak 2019 was not designed to simulate an actual response or test current coordination structures. As you can see in all these documents, they're very sure to specify. Now, this is not a drill. This is all hypothetical. And yet we have so many hypothetical scenarios that they're playing out just in time for the COVID outbreak. In fact, this started in October 31st, 2019. However, they studied the game findings, and that came out April 1st, 2020. So this whole thing was going on while COVID emerged, and similar to all these other exercises that they were doing. So I know that a lot of people want to chalk that up to coincidence. I don't understand the thought process there. What is wrong with your ability to think when you can't put two and two together? That is beyond coincidence. Maybe if it happened once, but not 5 times. And these are just the ones I know about. There's probably a hell of a lot more. Participants. So the Urban Outbreak game brought together 50 highly skilled professionals with substantial tactical and operational level experience in humanitarian response to participate in a 2-day game focused on a high-risk scenario for a multinational emergency response. The game began with 30 male and 20 female role players distributed to 5 different sector-specific cells. Each of the following sectors was represented by approximately 10 players. U.S. and international military, which was Alpha Cell, humanitarian NGOs, Bravo Cell, U.S. government, Charlie Cell, international organizations and agencies, Delta Cell, and the private sector, Echo Cell. Players averaged nearly 13 years of service in government, military, agency, NGO, or private sector entities. Urban Outbreak is set in the notional coastal city of Olympia, which is located on the southwestern edge in the sovereign nation of Olympus. With a population of approximately 21 million, the city of Olympia possesses the highest levels of income inequality in the world. Remember, back from their oldest documents, they're super focused on least developed countries and income inequality. That ties into the population agenda of the NSSM 200. Approximately 60% of its inhabitants live in informal settlements and slums, and only 3% of the population has access to public water facilities. The preponderance of the population receives its health care through informal medical providers, many of whom lack professional credentials, university-level medical training, or hospital-grade supplies or equipment. Within this challenging context, the first move of the game introduced the outbreak of a pathogen that was originally identified in rodents but is later spread by person-to-person contact. So we're studying a pathogen. And this is specific to, not specific to a country, whereas, for example, Crimson Contagion that was U.S. specific. This is a look at how to deal with this situation globally, particularly in this hypothetical country, which is underdeveloped. The first move of the game So the first move of the game focused on initial planning in response to the pathogen outbreak, which was declared a public health emergency of international concern by the World Health Organization. All right, so that followed in line with reality and resulted in the request for support from international militaries. The second move emphasized the difficulties found in coordinating and delivering an effective response when faced with exponential growth of the infection, civil unrest, a breakdown of formal governance and public health systems, misinformation, and medical resource scarcity. The third move presented players with a break in the spread of the disease. Players could freely interpret this as a momentary lull in the outbreak or explore viable options for a transition from crisis response and return to a perceived steady state. Okay, it almost sounds like if it is a plan rather than just a it's an exercise, it's a drill. But if it's a plan on top of that, then we would be likely to see a lull in COVID-19. And this is really insinuating that there's going to be another resurgence. Olympia itself is an exhaustively researched and designed city, and players had access to detailed information in the 34-page Olympia fact book, covering everything from maternal mortality. They're really focused on that. Remember, that's a big old population control focus. That's why it always turns up in these documents. And water quality to transportation statistics and gang affiliations. You know what they lump in with gang affiliations? Religious groups. That's what they're studying. And they say as much later on. But I thought it interesting to mention that because they've got a 34-page fact book. This is not just like, hey, let's pretend there's like a city and or a country or a state or whatever, some kind of a region, and there's an outbreak, and how do we deal with that? No, this is like a super meticulously hypothesized region with statistics and everything that go along with it. They've got it. They've got it figured out. They want to know how to deal with a specific region like this Olympus. So it is not haphazard, super researched. All right, so that kind of gives the overview to what it was. This is more the findings. One thing that they found, forced mass quarantine or other top-down approaches might be counterproductive. That's probably why they didn't go with it. Establish local media relationships early for risk communication as outbreak intensifies. In order to effectively combat misinformation and rumors, risk communication should be hyperlocal, establish a track record for truth early, and directly involve known community members with the stated focus of honesty over polished language or production value. It's interesting that they have to say that being honest is important. Yep. Yeah, it is. So they're really focused on preventing that misinformation, which is information that they don't want you to know. A highly unusual mission. Okay, we don't need to read that part. Expanded findings. Any containment strategy requires testing and tracing. This is not possible once a large enough population is infected. In the same way, altering businesses, social or cultural practices is significantly less effective when a society is facing a wide range of new challenges, especially severe economic and social pressures. Clarity, speed, and repetition are essential for changes within a population and are most effectively achieved before other factors start making decisions for them. Interesting, huh? So basically, we need to get this narrative out before other people, before they can start thinking for themselves. If you go back to, I believe this was also in SPARS, where there was a complete loss of power for over a fairly broad region. The consideration there was that those people in that region, they're not going to be able to receive these messages that we're constantly projecting through televisions and radio and from every which information dissemination machine, which would primarily be mainstream media. So what are we going to do about that? It's not about, man, they lost their power. We need to restore that. It's like, man, they lost their power. They're not going to get the indoctrinating messages, which remember is part of how to indoctrinate people. This goes back to Nazi propagandists. They know, and they've known for a long time, that in order for people to believe propaganda, you have to regurgitate the message over and over and over. It's about repetition. So that's why they mention here clarity, speed, and repetition are essential for changes within a population. Sick people actively seeking care, testing, and public health messages concerning self-isolation and quarantine of contacts are the ways to end outbreaks. Forced mass quarantines are a direct barrier to those activities. One cannot slow the spread of disease if people hide infections out of fear or stigma. When authorities attempt to enforce a mass quarantine on a large population, they will not be 100% effective. By stigmatizing the infection and symptoms, they will teach others to hide their symptoms and drive key populations underground. This results in less sharing of information with authorities and medical providers, and the most desperate and the highest risk populations will seek to break quarantine. The highest risk population will seek to break quarantine. Now, interesting, they're calling out some key populations here. I wonder what those are. They're saying that forced mass quarantine is not the way to go. The best way to go is to make sure you're controlling the narrative. Because if you try to force mass quarantine, it's going to backfire, which is why they haven't done it. NGOs and some U.S. government independently identified a shift from national to local media outlets and dissemination, focusing on TV, radio, and billboards for carpet bombing public health messaging, as opposed to web, national, or international, in order to build local trust, relevance, and community response rate. So using community messaging is more effective than something like, say, CNN or Fox or anything like that. Now, on the back, I found some of these appendices interesting. So I starred them because they sum it up here. So urban challenges and areas of inquiry in urban outbreaks. So an area of inquiry. Assessment data from rural mountainous region. That's because that would be a lot harder to control than some kind of an urban environment. False information / suspicion concerning the outbreak and response is an area of concern. Loss of power, utilities, dock workers, security, etc. Kind of goes back to cyber polygon, which maybe we'll look at that next. But it's in there. They're communicating this pretty frequently. This idea that, well, we might just lose power completely. That could happen. Just before COVID-19, they were saying, well, there could be a global pandemic. That could happen. So I'm expecting a complete loss of power at some point in the next couple of years, just because they keep hinting at it. So that's an area of inquiry. Increased international military role of informal transit for response, quarantine and roadblocks, something that worked its way into this. And then finally, and these are just the highlighted points here, security, rise of gangs and religious groups. So that's going to be very dangerous to their aims, the rise of gangs and religious groups. We're just going to put those two things in the same category because, I mean, after all, sort of similar. People going out, robbing innocent people, doing drive-by shootings, and religious groups that go on missions trips and things like that. Those are two very problematic peoples. Actually, they talk about how they can utilize gangs in this for their benefit, which I thought was interesting. Not so much the religious groups, because religious groups have a different foundation for evaluating information, a different foundation for evaluating what's true, different than the mainstream media, different than their televisions. That's why they're dangerous, because they get their truth from a different resource. That's why in communist dictatorships, they get rid of religion first and foremost, because they need to control information. They need to control the narrative because they need to control the people. And religion is very bad for that. despite what a lot of people think, religion is conducive to independent thinking. It's conducive to thinking apart from state-sanctioned narratives. World leaders and dictators don't like that. So here we have yet another drill for how to contain a global pathogen that was run a couple months before COVID blew up the world. Interesting to note the timing on these things. I mean, I think the timing of it is more interesting than the actual content. So that's all I've got on that. I have a number of articles that are pretty eye-opening, and maybe I'll do that next. Honestly, should probably look at um, the research. I've got some research on these vaccinations that they say are proven effective, and um, claims like that. Uh, some history on Fauci, which is a little bit alarming. Um, so maybe that next, but I'm hoping to move into transhumanism soon because that's what is what is to come, and hopefully not super soon. Ideally, never, but that's not possible. It's going to happen. Um, Anyone in the know says it's going to happen. They say it's going to happen actually fairly soon, more soon than what a lot of people would want to believe actually. And I've got a lot of stuff on that. So really hoping to jump into that because that stuff is rather mind blowing. But probably the vaccination stuff next. That's kind of boring, and I want to get it out of the way. Well, I mean, it's not really boring. It's pretty relevant. It's boring to read, I should say. Boring to read. I don't like reading research, experimentation, research designs, and things like that. But some pretty important information in the abstracts and in the results of those. So that will come next, and I guess that's all for today.